She handed me the glass, but didn't look at me. Water. No ice. Just like I don't like it. I held it, nodded once, and set it down without drinking. We were 10 minutes into breakfast and hadn't said a word. The eggs were cold. The toast sat untouched between us like a paper-thin barrier neither of us wanted to cross. Outside, a dog barked. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed. But inside that kitchen, just her and me, there was no sound. No humming fridge. No clinking cutlery. No apologies. Just silence so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest. She was scrolling again. Same fingers, same smirk, same muscle memory. And whatever lit up her phone screen, it wasn't me. Hasn't been me in a long, long time. I moved my plate an inch. It scraped against the wood and startled her. She glanced up. First eye contact in 4 days. I saw nothing. Not anger. Not love. Not even boredom. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. And then, just to test the theory, I said, I think the faucet's leaking. Nothing. Not even a blink. She turned her wrist, tilted the phone, and snorted softly. Whatever meme or message she was reading had more soul than I did, apparently. That's when I looked at her left hand. No ring. Not forgotten. Removed. I stared at the pale band of skin where it used to be. I remembered sliding it on her finger at the courthouse. Her hands were shaking that day. She laughed nervously and called me a softie when I said the vows like I meant them. I didn't mean them. Now, that same hand scrolled right past me. She hadn't kissed me in 37 days. Yes, I counted. I counted because I was the one trying. I was the one who bought her new toothpaste when she ran out. I was the one who scheduled the furnace maintenance. I was the one who picked up the lemon tea she said helped her sleep. She didn't ask. She didn't thank me. She didn't notice. I once dreamed of growing old with this woman. Now I was afraid to cough in front of her because it might make her sigh. And in that moment, I wondered what would happen if I flipped the glass off the table. Just gently tipped it. Would she react? Would she care? I didn't flip it. I stood up instead. Slowly. Like every inch I rose might be the last tether between us. I waited. Paused. Willed her to say something. Anything. She didn't. So I turned. The floor creaked under my heel. That familiar old plank by the door used to make her giggle when we first moved in. This place is alive, she said. Even the floors talk. Now they groaned under my weight, and she didn't hear a thing. I took my keys. Not fast. Not quietly either. Let them jingle. Made sure she had the chance to stop me. Nothing. I opened the door. Still nothing. And then I stepped outside, into the sharp morning air. The glass didn't break. But something else did. I didn't drive anywhere that morning. Just sat in the car. The engine off. The window cracked. The cold air moved in and settled on my neck. But I didn't roll it up. I didn't even shiver. I just stared at the empty street, parked right there in front of my own house, hands resting on the steering wheel like I was waiting for traffic that wasn't coming. Inside, she was probably still scrolling. And here's the thing. I didn't leave because of a fight. There were no slammed doors, no raised voices, no thrown plates. What I walked away from wasn't a storm, it was the absence of weather altogether. The kind of cold that builds over time, like a slow leak in your roof you ignore until one day your ceiling caves in. The silence had shape, texture. I could feel it in my chest, like lint collecting in your lungs. You don't notice it until breathing hurts. I didn't want to be the dramatic husband who packs a bag and yells, "I'm done." But what do you do when staying feels more pathetic than leaving? What do you do when your existence becomes less significant than a blue notification bubble on someone's phone? I tried calling her name once last week. Just her name. Nothing else. She didn't even flinch. Not even a huh. I sat in that car for an hour before I even realized I hadn't brought my phone. It was still on the kitchen counter next to the sink, right where she always left hers until she got that second one. Yeah, I hadn't told you about that yet, had I? The second phone. It was green. One of those cheap burner models you can pick up at any pharmacy. I found it by accident under the passenger seat of her car. I was vacuuming the floor mats for her. A little surprise after she complained her car smelled like old takeout. I pulled it out, pressed the power button, and it lit up with no passcode. The wallpaper was a photo of a cat. Not our cat. A cat I'd never seen. There were only 2 contacts saved. One named H. The other named Do Not Answer. She told me once that secrets live in simplicity. The easiest way to hide something, she said, is to make it look boring. I didn't open the messages. I didn't want to be that guy. The one who digs through phones and sniffs clothes and tracks IP addresses just to confirm what is good already screams. but I did turn it off and put it back exactly where I found it. Then I walked into the house and kissed her on the top of the head. She didn't even look up. That was 2 weeks ago. This morning, when I stood up and walked out, I didn't take that phone. I wanted her to know I knew, without ever saying it out loud. I wanted the silence to do what my words couldn't. Around 9:14 a.m., I finally turned the ignition. The old Honda sputtered like it didn't want to start. Just like me. I drove nowhere in particular, just circled through the neighborhood like I was waiting to see my name etched on a street sign. Passed the same park 3 times. Watched 2 kids kicking a soccer ball back and forth while their mother read something on her tablet and ignored them. Everyone was ignoring everyone. I parked at the gas station. Sat there. Then went in and bought a bottle of orange juice. I hate orange juice. But it felt like something to do. When I stepped back out, I had this moment, this bizarre, frozen second, where I expected her to call me. To panic. To realize I was gone. But the phone stayed silent. Because it wasn't me she texted first thing in the morning. Not anymore. I leaned against the side of the car and stared down the road that led home. I wasn't ready to go back, but I also had nowhere else to go. And then, the thought hit me. What if I didn't? What if I just didn't go back? What if the next sound she heard wasn't the floor creak or the front door? What if it was the realization that she'd finally silenced the one person who actually stayed? I didn't drive home. Not yet. Instead, I drove to a hotel 2 towns over and paid cash for a room with yellow wallpaper and a television that buzzed slightly when you turned it on. I took off my shoes, lay on the bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling for hours. Didn't turn on the lights. Didn't even pull the curtains. And at exactly 5:03 p.m., I heard the faintest sound from inside the room next door. A woman was laughing. Loud, unfiltered laughter, one of those real, belly-deep laughs that you can't fake. And it hit me. I hadn't heard that kind of laughter in months. Especially not from her. I stayed in that motel room longer than I should have. Not because it was comfortable, God no. The mattress had a dip in the middle, the remote only worked if you pointed it at a 45-degree angle, and the bathroom light flickered like it was auditioning for a horror movie. But that room, that ugly little room felt more honest than my own home. Because in there, silence didn't pretend to be something else. It wasn't a weapon or a punishment. It just was. I woke up the next morning to a text from my coworker asking if I'd submitted the financial wrap-up for the quarter. I hadn't. I was supposed to. I should have cared. But I just stared at the message for a full minute before tossing the phone onto the bed. No word from her. No missed calls. No messages asking, "Where are you?" Or, "Are you okay?" Not even a petty, "You forgot to refill the Brita." Nothing. So I did what every lost man does when he doesn't want to go home. I lingered. I walked around a thrift shop down the street, not looking for anything, just letting my fingers skim across old toasters and faded t-shirts like I might bump into a version of myself in one of the aisles. I ended up buying a paperback book with a broken spine for $2. The cashier said, "You look tired." I said, "I am." And for some reason, that little exchange felt more human than anything I'd shared with Felicity in the last 3 months. Around noon, I finally opened the book. Page 32 had a grocery list scribbled in blue pen. Pasta, tomatoes, eggs, soap. Somebody had lived a whole life with that pen in their hand, and now it was sitting in my lap like a ghost. Everything felt haunted. Even the paper. At 2:17 p.m., I checked my phone again. Still nothing from her. So I did it. I called the house. 2 rings. 3. Voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I drove back. Not because I forgave anything or had something dramatic to say, but because I needed socks. That's how far I'd fallen. My only reason for returning was cotton and elastic. I figured I'd sneak in, grab a bag of clothes, maybe my laptop, and slide back out before she even noticed. But when I pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong. Not someone broken wrong. Just off. The curtains were open. Not all the way, just a few inches, like someone had peeked out and then forgotten to close them. I sat there in the car with the engine running, staring at that gap, trying to read the shadows. Then I saw it. A mug. On the kitchen counter. The one with the cracked handle she always used when she was nervous. She hadn't touched that mug in months. I turned off the car. I walked up the steps. And when I opened the front door, it hit me, not the air, not a smell, but the silence. A different kind of silence than before. Not empty, expectant. I stepped inside. The hallway light was on. And then I heard something. A footstep. But not hers. Heavier. Slower. I froze. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I was just sleep-deprived and paranoid and unraveling in real time. But then the silence shifted again. A chair creaked. I moved toward the living room, careful not to let the floor creak under me. When I peeked around the corner, there was no one there. Just her purse, tossed on the couch. And next to it, another phone. Not the burner. Not hers. Another one. Unlocked. Still lit up. Someone had just been using it. I picked it up without thinking. There were no contacts saved. Just a blank screen and the browser still open to Google Maps. Directions to a hotel. Not mine. A different one. Across town. She wasn't here. Neither was he. I should have been angry. Or devastated. Or betrayed. But I felt nothing. Because the truth is, this wasn't about love anymore. This wasn't about passion or betrayal or vows. This was about silence. And who would break it first? I left the phone where I found it. And I went upstairs to the bedroom that once held laughter and warmth and matching socks and opened my drawer. The socks were gone. There was no denying it now. Someone else had been in the house. Not yesterday. Not last week. Recently. Maybe even this morning. The second phone, the moved curtain, the slight shift in the bedroom mirror angle, small details, barely noticeable on their own, but together they formed a pattern. And I'm not the kind of man who sees ghosts in corners. I see facts. I see movement. I notice when my socks disappear from my drawer and when the pillows on my side of the bed are fluffed slightly differently than I ever left them. It's subtle, but it's there, a second presence walking through my spaces, wearing the silence like camouflage. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and stared at the empty nightstand. My nightstand. There used to be a photo there. Us, in Asheville, hiking in the rain, her hair frizzy, me holding up a crooked umbrella. She had laughed when the frame arrived because I picked one that said, "Better Together," in script font. That's so cringe, she teased. But I love it. The photo had been gone for at least a month, and I pretended not to notice. But I had. And now the entire nightstand was bare. Like I had never been there. I opened the drawer slowly. Inside was something that didn't belong. A small black notebook with no label, no design. It wasn't mine. Felicity didn't journal, at least. She never used to. I hesitated. The idea of reading it felt invasive. But then again, I was standing in the ruins of a relationship where privacy had already turned into secrecy. So I picked it up. It felt warm. Someone had just used it. I opened the cover. Nothing on the first page. Nothing on the second. And then a line, written in quick, slightly shaky handwriting, like it had been scribbled fast. Tuesday, he's starting to ask questions. I felt a flush creep up my neck. My heart wasn't racing, it was slowing. The kind of slow that comes before something breaks. I flipped to the next page. Don't mention the necklace. That was it. That's all the page said. The necklace. My stomach turned. 3 months ago, she came home late from dinner with coworkers, and when I leaned in to hug her, I noticed it. A thin silver chain with a small, unfamiliar pendant tucked just under her blouse. When I asked about it, she told me it was a gift from a client. A generic excuse. I let it go. But now it was in the notebook. A warning. A reminder. A breadcrumb that didn't belong in my house. I didn't hear the front door open, but I heard her voice. Not calling for me. Not even checking if anyone was home. Just speaking, low, annoyed. I told you not to bring it here. I froze. My entire body locked in place like a statue. I carefully slid the notebook into the drawer and closed it. Soft. Quiet. I moved to the closet and closed the door behind me, leaving it slightly cracked. My heartbeat felt like it echoed in the wood panels. Then another voice answered her. A man. Calm. Confident. Cold. I had to. He's already been here. You're not careful. She laughed, but not the laugh I used to know. This one was bitter. He doesn't know anything. The man replied. Yet, I couldn't see them, but I could hear their footsteps, one set in heels, the other in boots. They walked through the hallway, into the kitchen. I could hear the fridge open. The clink of a glass. They were comfortable. At ease. He said, Do you still sleep in that bed with him? A pause. Then, Not lately. Not really. He chuckled. Figures. She responded, lower now. I just need a little more time. Once it's done, I'll be gone. We both will. That last line sat in the air like a thick fog. Once it's done? What was it? I didn't move. I barely breathed. Eventually, I heard footsteps going down to the basement. The door opened, creaked, then closed again. When I finally slipped out of the closet, I moved fast but quiet. Straight to the kitchen. Their phones were on the counter. Unlocked. Her main one and the burner. I didn't touch them. Instead, I went to the fridge and opened it, just to hear the same sound he heard. I wanted to absorb it. Make it mine again. Then I saw something strange on the top shelf, a sealed manila envelope with a sticky note on it. For the lawyer. No name. No date. Just that. And that was when I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe until that very second. They weren't just sleeping together. They were planning something. Something about me. The envelope in the fridge wasn't an accident. It was a message. A place where I'd see it if I happened to go looking for a snack. A place casual enough to pretend it wasn't meant for my eyes, but calculated enough that if I found it, I'd ask questions. Only now I wasn't sure if they cared whether I did or didn't. Maybe they were done pretending. I didn't touch it. I wanted to. I wanted to rip it open right there, slam it on the counter, and demand answers. But instead, I just stood there, my hand resting on the edge of the fridge door, the cold air biting my wrist. My eyes fixed on those 3 words scrawled in her handwriting. For the lawyer. For the lawyer. Not a lawyer. The lawyer. That phrasing stuck to my skin like oil. I closed the fridge softly, like I was afraid of making a sound, and I backed out of the kitchen with slow, deliberate steps. I moved like a man sneaking through his own murder scene. Down the hallway, around the corner, back into the living room where the air felt heavier than it should have. I stood there, gripping the back of the couch, trying to calm my breathing. I had no plan. No script. Just adrenaline. What did it mean? What exactly was done? Divorce was the obvious answer, but something about that envelope made me question everything. There was an edge to it. Not spite, calculation. It didn't feel like heartbreak. It felt like logistics. Organization. Coordination. Like I'd been moved around on a board by people who'd already shaken hands behind my back. I went upstairs. Quickly. Quietly. Their voices had gone silent downstairs. I could only assume they were still in the basement. The only time Felicity went into the basement was when she needed storage space or laundry detergent. I never remembered her leading a man down there with her. But then again, I'd never considered she might have company like this. I entered our bedroom again and sat on the edge of the bed. The pillows were too fluffed. The bed too smooth. Everything in this room had been touched. Rearranged. But not for comfort, for appearance. That's when I noticed something else. The closet door was slightly ajar. Not the one I'd hidden in earlier. The other one, her side. I stood up and opened it fully. Nothing jumped out at first. Just her usual. Dresses, shoes, a few sweaters hanging in a line. But then I saw it, a duffel bag. Large. Black. New. Tucked behind her luggage, zipped and angled as if ready to be grabbed. I pulled it out and placed it on the bed. Zipped it open slowly. Inside, a passport. An envelope of cash. Her birth certificate. A copy of our marriage license. 2 thumb drives. And under all of that, another sealed envelope, thinner than the one in the fridge. This one had no label, but it was addressed. To me. Just my name, written on the front in the same tight, sharp handwriting she used to leave grocery notes with. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Not yet. Because once you open something like that, you can't go back. Once you know what's inside, you become responsible for it. And I wasn't sure I could handle another shift in reality while they were still beneath me, potentially plotting something I wasn't meant to survive. I placed the envelope back exactly where I found it, zipped the bag shut, slid it into the closet, and walked to the window. The neighbor's sprinkler was on, spinning in slow, glistening arcs over their lawn. Everything out there looked normal. Ordinary. Meanwhile, my house was a stage being set for something else entirely. And that's when I heard the door open. Not the basement. The front. I spun around, heart in my throat, and footsteps echoed up the stairs. Light ones. Female. She was coming up. I stepped into the hallway just as she reached the landing. Felicity looked at me. Her face didn't twist in surprise. She didn't freeze or flinch. She just said, casually, "Oh, you're back." As if I'd gone out for milk. As if she hadn't disappeared for days while I unraveled in motel rooms and thrift stores. As if the man in our basement wasn't real. As if I wasn't holding on to every thread of composure like it might slip out of my hands any second. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. And then she smiled, soft, calm, almost apologetic, and added, "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." There's a particular kind of silence that follows the words, "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." It's not the stunned kind. Not even the kind that comes after betrayal. It's the silence of a final curtain being drawn, when you realize the show's been going on without you, and the audience was never on your side. She stood at the top of the stairs with that half-smile, her hand still on the railing like this was just another Tuesday. Like we were about to discuss paint colors or whether to renew the Netflix subscription. I stared at her for what felt like a minute, but was probably 10 seconds. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Her body language was controlled, effortless, almost rehearsed. I hated how calm she looked, not because it made her the villain, but because it made me realize I'd never been the main character in her story. Maybe I never had been. What is it I was supposed to figure out? I asked, my voice so dry it didn't sound like mine. She tilted her head slightly. You tell me, she said. You've been snooping. There was no accusation in her tone, just observation, like she was reading bullet points off a report I had unknowingly written for her. You left a bag packed, I said. I did, she replied simply. And a note, addressed to me. Her expression didn't change. Yes. And a second phone. That too. I took a step forward. And him. Now she blinked. Not quickly, but slowly, like she was considering whether to answer at all. Then she said, he's part of it, but not in the way you think. My mouth went dry. So tell me what I'm supposed to think. She leaned against the wall now, casually, like we were in a waiting room. You and I haven't spoken, really spoken, in months. I figured you'd either find your spine or sign the papers without reading them. I was okay with either outcome. There was no anger in her voice. No malice. Just apathy. And it chilled me more than rage ever could have. What's in the envelope? I asked, even though I already knew. Your release, she said. And mine. I swallowed hard. Why like this? Why not just talk to me? Now she laughed, not cruelly, but like someone reading a punchline in a foreign language. Owen, she said softly. We stopped talking a long time ago. This, whatever this is now, it's just the echoes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab a vase and shatter it against the wall just to break the emotional vacuum she seemed so comfortable floating in. But instead, I said something I hadn't planned to say. I thought you were waiting for me to change. She shook her head slowly. No, I was waiting to see if you'd notice I already had. I looked down at the floor. The wood under our feet. I'd sanded and stained that floor myself 2 winters ago while she visited her mother for a week. When she came back, she hadn't even noticed until I pointed it out. I should have known then. I loved you, I said, barely louder than a whisper. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The silence between us swallowed that sentence whole. I'm not cheating, she said a moment later. Not exactly. I raised my eyes. He's involved. But it's not what you think. It's not romantic anymore. It's practical. I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't sure I wanted to. And the money? I asked. The envelope downstairs? Her gaze didn't shift. That's for the lawyer. And the cash in the duffel bag. She hesitated. For what? I pressed. A getaway? A contingency? For if I didn't go quietly? Still, she didn't speak. And then I said the one thing that broke her expression, cracked it right down the middle. You were hoping I'd leave myself, so you wouldn't have to be the one to break it. Her eyes flinched, barely, but it was there. That was it. That was the plan all along. Push me out without laying a hand. Starve me without ever touching a plate. Ghost me from 5 feet away until I walked out the door on my own and saved her the guilt. She looked down at her feet. You're not wrong. And for the first time in months, she looked ashamed. It didn't make me feel better. I turned around and walked back into the bedroom, grabbed a duffel bag, not hers, mine, and opened my own drawer. Empty. I hadn't realized how much I'd already been erased. I stuffed 2 shirts in, underwear, a pair of jeans, no socks, because I knew they were gone. Felicity didn't try to stop me. I zipped the bag, looked around once more. This bedroom that used to hold the version of us that laughed at storms and danced while brushing our teeth. And then I said, I don't need the envelope. She stood in the doorway, still not crying, still not chasing me. I know, she said. And that was it. I walked past her, down the stairs, past the kitchen, past the fridge, past the envelope. I didn't touch it, but I knew the moment I left the house, she would. And I knew it would be over, but not the way I'd imagined. I didn't look back as I stepped out of the house, not even once. Not at the doorway, not at the curtains, not at her. I just walked. Each step wasn't a choice, it was a reaction. My body had gone into a rhythm it didn't want my mind involved in. One foot, then the other. The sound of gravel under my boots was louder than it had any right to be. When I got to the car, I didn't sit down right away. I stood next to it for a full minute, keys in hand, staring at the windshield. My own reflection stared back at me faintly, stretched by the curve of the glass, warped and blurry. That man didn't look angry. He looked erased. And maybe that's exactly what she wanted. The moment the door closed behind me, I realized I had no destination, no plan, no next step. My first thought was the motel again, but even that felt too familiar now, like going in circles. I needed somewhere that didn't remind me of her, somewhere that didn't remind me of me with her. So I drove. Miles blurred under the tires. The radio stayed off. My phone stayed silent in the passenger seat, like it knew it wasn't the star of this show anymore. I passed neighborhoods I didn't recognize, gas stations I didn't stop at, and towns whose names didn't mean anything to me. At one point I pulled into a roadside diner, not to eat, but to sit in a booth and drink burnt coffee from a chipped cup. The waitress didn't ask questions. She saw the look on my face and just refilled my mug twice and left the check upside down on the table. Maybe she'd seen men like me before. When I eventually found a place to sleep that night, it wasn't a motel. It was one of those aging bed-and-breakfast places that tries too hard to be charming. Faded floral wallpaper, the scent of lemon cleaner, and a desk clerk who smiled too much. She handed me a brass key with a number engraved on a wooden fob. "Room 6, she said. "Back corner." When I entered, the first thing I noticed was that the room had no mirror. None. No one to greet me when I walked in. No reflection to judge me as I unzipped my bag and dropped it on the floor. Just beige walls, a window that looked out into nothing, and a bed with a quilt that had clearly been hand-sewn by someone who thought loneliness could be softened with thread. I lay down without removing my shoes. The ceiling above me had a faint crack running across it, thin, like a vein. I watched it for what felt like hours, and the longer I stared, the more it started to resemble something else. A scar, the kind that doesn't quite fade. I wondered how long it had taken for that ceiling to crack. Did someone hit it? Or did it just grow there quietly over time, like silence in a marriage? Eventually, I fell asleep. But I didn't stay asleep. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up to my phone vibrating against the wooden nightstand. One buzz, then silence. No call, just a message. It was from an unknown number. No name, just one line of text. She told him everything. My chest went tight. I sat up in the dark, the phone screen still glowing in my palm. I read the message again. And again, I knew exactly what it meant, and I hated that I did. I hated that it wasn't surprising. I replied without thinking. "Who is this?" The message was delivered. No response. I waited 5 minutes. Then 10. Nothing. I called the number. It rang once. Then disconnected. I turned the phone off. Not because I thought it would help, but because it was the only thing I could control. The next morning, I checked out before the sun came up. No breakfast. No polite nods. I handed the key back to the same clerk, who didn't ask why I looked even more hollow than when I'd arrived. She just said, "Take care," like it was a habit. I got back in the car, and for the first time in 2 days, I made a decision. I was going to see her mother. Felicity's mom, Lenore, lived on the other side of the county in a quiet little blue house surrounded by wind chimes. She had always liked me, said I made her daughter less mean. She said it as a compliment. I used to laugh. The drive took 50 minutes. I rehearsed nothing. When I pulled up, her car was gone. But the porch light was on, even in daylight. That was unusual. I knocked. Waited. Knocked again. No answer. I circled the house. The back door was open. Not wide. Just a few inches. Enough to feel wrong. I stepped inside, calling softly. "Lenore." No response. The house was still, but not empty. Something had been moved. The living room, always meticulous, had a drawer pulled out of the cabinet, half open, like someone had been rifling through papers and left in a hurry. On the coffee table sat an old photo album. Not opened. Just sitting there, alone, like it had been taken out to prove a point and then never used. I called her name again. Nothing. And then my eyes landed on the envelope. Another one. Plain. No name. No markings. Just like the one in the duffel bag. And I knew, before I even touched it, that this story wasn't just mine anymore. The envelope on the coffee table didn't feel like the others. I could sense it before I even touched it. This one didn't carry weight in the legal sense. It wasn't packed with cash or copies of documents. It was light. Thin. 1 or 2 pages, at most. And somehow, that made it more frightening. Still, I picked it up. Sat down on the edge of the couch where I had spent a dozen quiet Thanksgivings with Felicity and her mother. My hands were shaking, not violently, but enough to notice. I peeled back the flap and slid the folded paper out. The first thing I saw was the handwriting. It was Lenore's. The second thing I saw was the date, 3 weeks ago. And then I began to read. Owen, if you're reading this, it means you've stepped far enough into this to realize something's wrong. And I'm sorry you had to find it this way. I know my daughter. I know what she's capable of, not just in terms of cruelty, but detachment. She inherited it from her father. I've watched her close people out her whole life. I tried to warn her that one day she'd close out someone she shouldn't. I know about the second phone. I know about the plan. And no, she didn't tell me directly. I found out by accident. I read a message she left open on my computer when she came to visit. She meant to clear it. She didn't. I wasn't supposed to see it. But I did. You've been kind to her longer than she deserved. You've been patient longer than most would tolerate. I don't blame you if you left. I wouldn't either. But if, by some miracle, you're still reading this and you haven't burned the world down around her, then maybe there's still a version of your life that doesn't end in bitterness. That's why I left you this letter. That's why I left the back door open. Because I knew you'd come here. You were always the only one who paid attention. Lenore. I sat there a long time after finishing it, just holding the letter in my lap like it might vanish if I moved too fast. There were no instructions in it. No revelation that undid everything I knew. But for some reason, it was the first honest thing I'd received in months. And it steadied me. I didn't call Felicity. I didn't drive back. I didn't even message Lenore to say thank you. Instead, I got in my car and headed west. Not to punish her. Not to escape. But to begin again. It took 3 days of driving. I stopped in towns I'd never heard of. Ate diner breakfasts. Talked to strangers who didn't know my name and didn't care about the hole I'd left behind. I listened to old songs on the radio and rolled the windows down even when the wind tangled my hair and dried my eyes. On the 4th day, I reached the coast. I didn't plan it. My car just sort of pointed that way and I let it. I found a small place near the water, owned by a retired couple who didn't ask many questions. They had a studio above their garage. Cheap rent. No lease. Cash preferred. I took it. The walls were bare. The mattress firm. The kitchen tiny. But the silence there was different. Not heavy. Not weaponized. Not lonely. Peaceful. That night, I stood outside on the balcony, barefoot, a mug of coffee in my hand, and for the first time in months, I breathed without feeling like I had to earn it. Felicity never reached out. I never tried to follow up. The past didn't disappear, but it stopped chasing me. And in its place, something unfamiliar began to grow. Not joy. Not yet. But space. And space, I realized, was a beginning, not an ending.